The year is 1554. Lady Jane Grey, at the age of 16, was preparing for her own execution. She blindfolded herself. With her head on the block, Jane spoke the last words of Jesus as recounted by Luke. "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." Only 6 months earlier, she was the Queen of England for 9 days. Her successor, Mary I, accepted the Privy Council's advice and ordered Jane and her husband's execution. How did the young queen lose her crown and her life in such a short span of time? Jane Grey was born at Bradgate Park in Leicestershire in October 1537. She was the eldest daughter of Henry Grey, the first Duke of Suffolk, and his wife Frances. Hers was a high-status family. Both her parents were frequently at court. Jane's mother, Lady Frances, was the daughter of Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's youngest sister. Through her grandmother, Lady Jane Grey was directly linked to the King, Henry VIII. Like other girls in her position, Jane received a strict but good education at home. She learnt classical languages such as Greek, Latin and Hebrew, as well as French and Italian, and through her father and tutors was exposed to Protestantism. In the spring of 1547, when she was 10, Jane was sent to the household of Thomas Seymour. It was common in the Tudor period for aristocratic children to be brought up in other households, especially if the foster family was of a higher status. Around the same time, in 1547, Thomas Seymour married Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's widow. Catherine was close to Henry's children and personally oversaw their education. She was a keen Protestant and an educated woman. Thomas Seymour was a close family friend. His late sister was Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife. But most importantly, he was the uncle of the new king, Edward VI. The ambitious Thomas realised that having Jane under his influence could be extremely profitable. Both Jane and Edward were still children, but when they reached maturity, Thomas was planning to marry Jane to the king. Meanwhile, a new reign had started. Edward was the son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, and the first English monarch to be raised a Protestant. Henry VIII had declared his daughters illegitimate and passed the succession to his son. Edward VI was 9 years old and too young to rule by himself. So a council of regency was formed, led by Edward VI's uncle and Thomas Seymour's elder brother, Edward Seymour, the first Duke of Somerset. As the young king's protector, Edward Seymour exploited his powerful position, much to the annoyance of the council, and especially his younger brother Thomas Seymour, who wanted the role for himself. Catherine died on the 5th of September 1548 from what is thought to have been childbed fever. After his wife's death, Seymour made it clear his intention to marry Henry VIII's daughter, Princess Elizabeth. She avoided him, returning with her governess to her childhood home. Driven to desperate action to get close to the boy king, Thomas tried to break into Edward VI's private apartments on the night of the 16th of January 1549. He entered the privy garden and woke one of the king's pet spaniels. He shot and killed the barking dog. The incident, being caught outside the king's bedroom at night with a loaded pistol, was interpreted in the most menacing light. He was arrested, sent to the Tower of London and executed on Tower Hill on the 20th of March 1549. Lady Jane Grey was sent home with no prospects of marrying the king. Meanwhile, Edward Seymour's rule of England on behalf of King Edward VI was a disaster. By 1549, the country was nearly bankrupt. Edward Seymour was blamed by the nobility and gentry for the social unrest. The other members of the council united against him, under their emerging leader John Dudley, who became Earl of Northumberland. His reluctance to employ force and refusal to assume military leadership merely made matters worse. Seymour no longer had the support of the aristocracy and had no choice but to give up his post. He was arrested and charged with treason. Edward Seymour was eventually executed at the Tower of London in January 1552. By this time, a collective governorship was in place led by John Dudley, which was more successful at running the country. On May the 21st, 1553, Guildford Dudley, Northumberland's second youngest son, married Lady Jane Grey. Towards the end of Henry VIII's life, he had a change of heart and passed the Third Succession Act, 1543, which returned his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, to the line of succession behind their younger half-brother Edward. As one of Henry VIII's great nieces, Lady Jane was a genuine claimant to the throne, but behind Mary and Elizabeth in the line of succession. When Edward's sickness was discovered to be terminal, he and his council drew up a document called Devise for the Succession to prevent the country's return to Catholicism. Edward named his first cousin, once removed, Lady Jane Grey, as his heir. Edward died at the age of 15 at Greenwich Palace on the 6th of July, 1553. Jane was summoned to Synon House, her father-in-law's London residence, to be told that according to Edward's instructions, she was now to be crowned queen. This appeared to come as a huge surprise to Lady Jane, who became very distressed. On the 10th of July, she was officially proclaimed Queen of England, France and Ireland after she had taken up secure residence in the Tower of London, where English monarchs customarily resided from the time of accession until coronation. Jane refused to name her husband Dudley as king because that would require an Act of Parliament. Northumberland faced a number of key tasks to consolidate his power after Edward's death. Most importantly, he had to isolate and ideally capture Mary Tudor to prevent her from gathering support. Northumberland set out from London with troops on the 14th of July to capture Mary. As soon as Mary was sure of King Edward's demise, she left her residence at Hunsdon and set out to East Anglia, where she began to rally her supporters. On the 9th of July, she wrote to the Privy Council with orders for her proclamation as Edward's successor. Mary's overwhelming support eventually caused Northumberland to surrender. The Privy Council turned against Jane Grey and proclaimed Mary as Queen on July the 19th, 1553. Mary rode triumphantly into London on a wave of popular support. She was accompanied by her half-sister Elizabeth and a procession of over 800 nobles and gentlemen. Parliament declared Mary the rightful successor and denounced and revoked Jane's proclamation of that of the usurper. Northumberland was arrested and later executed by Mary for attempting to prevent her from succeeding to the throne. Jane was charged with high treason, as were her husband. All defendants were found guilty and sentenced to death. Mary understood that the young Lady Jane was essentially a pawn in Northumberland's scheme. Lady Jane and her husband were kept under guard in the Tower rather than immediately executed. The Queen's staunch Catholicism and her plans to marry the hated Philip II of Spain had made her deeply unpopular. A series of uprisings followed, including the Protestant Wyatt Rebellion in 1554, but Jane's father was involved in the plot and put Jane and her husband in a difficult situation. Jane's existence became more of a threat to Mary, who could not afford to let her live. With reluctance, Queen Mary I accepted the Privy Council's advice and ordered Jane and Guildford's execution. On the 12th of February 1554, at around 10 o'clock in the morning, Guildford was taken to Tower Hill, where a crowd was waiting to watch him lose his head. From her window, Lady Jane saw his headless body being carried back to the chapel. She was then taken out to Tower Green inside the tower to be beheaded. The executioner asked her for forgiveness, which she granted him. She then blindfolded herself. The deputy lieutenant of the tower helped her find a way. The axe then fell, and Jane was beheaded in one clean stroke.